Unless your righteousness surpasses that of the scribes and Pharisees, you cannot enter the kingdom of heaven. Now we continue to hear from the 5th chapter of the Gospel according to Matthew, the Sermon on the Mount. We've been hearing this the last few Sundays, so we had the Beatitudes 2 weeks ago, and then Jesus was telling his followers to be light to the nations, salt of the earth. So he's continuing to teach his disciples the way to follow him. And now today in this reading, he's asserting that he did not come to abolish the law, but to fulfill it. So we have to continue to follow the old law, the old Mosaic law, the 10 Commandments. He did not come to abolish it, but to fulfill it. Now the Pharisees, they know the law very, very well. Backwards and forwards, every word, every letter of the law. And they pride themselves on keeping it perfectly. They pride themselves on keeping every aspect of it, not doing what's prohibited by the law and doing what's commanded. So much so that that becomes their way of seeing if they're righteous, how well you follow it. And they've forgotten to live it. They've forgotten to live the spirit of the law. And so when Jesus comes, he comes to breathe life into these old dry bones of the law. He comes to give meaning to what the law is. So that instead of just following it meticulously like the Pharisees and scribes, you as his disciples now 2,000 years later, you can live it, living the law, living the commandments, this law of love that God has given to his people. And now Jesus does this with a specific authority because he's God, the second person of the Holy Trinity. So he can do this. And we see throughout his sermon, he uses a little technique. Where first he says, you have heard, or it's been said to your ancestors, right, the Mosaic law. And then he says, but I say to you, Jesus as God standing there present to us say, this is how to live the law perfectly. This is how to follow the law as my disciple. So he goes through a number of things. First, the 5th commandment saying, thou shalt not kill. And we know that, right? We know that we shouldn't kill or do harm to others. But he's saying it's not just not harming someone. Don't even be angry with your brother. Don't even get angry and wish bad things for them. Don't have anger in your heart. Don't call them names. Don't call them fool. Don't gossip about them to other people. Don't wish them harm, but instead, you're supposed to love your brother. Be quick to forgive. Quick to forgive. Quick to reconcile if there's something between you and your neighbor, between you and your brother. To be forgiven. Find ways to compromise, to meet him or her in the middle. That's what it means to live the spirit of this commandment. And then Jesus continues talking about the 6th commandment, adultery. You shall not commit adultery. That's the letter of the law, the commandment, that act that we're not supposed to do. And yet he takes it much, much further and says, even if you look at another person, a man looks at a woman with lust, he's already committed adultery with her. So this purity of mind, of heart, in all that we do. Not just enough to say, I've never done X, Y, Z, but in your heart, is that pure? And this can be so difficult in today's society. You look around, if you're watching TV or you see any movies or you're reading things on the internet, there's so many places that they want to try to sell you something with lustful images or impure things. Try to get you to click on the next story, whatever. Jesus goes so far as to say, if your eye causes you to sin, rip it out and throw it away. Cut your hand off and throw it away if it causes you to sin. And so especially in this realm, brothers and sisters, we have to be very aware of that and know that sometimes there's circumstances, situations, even relationships that lead us into temptation, that can lead us into lust. And so it's better to separate ourselves from that. Better to walk away from that. Better to avoid it altogether. Sports websites are pretty bad at this, actually. There's quite a few of them where you go on there and you see different pictures. And so in some ways, like, I'll just figure out what the Twins starting rotation will be next year on some other site, right? Sometimes you just have to say, no, I'm not even going to go there. I'm not even going to go to that site. I'm not going to pick up that movie. I'm not going to watch that thing. To keep yourself pure, to avoid even lust of the eyes. Continuing on, Jesus is now talking about divorce. There's a law that says, in the Mosaic law that a man can divorce his wife as long as he gives her a written bill of divorce, i.e., she knows that she is now no longer bound to him and free to marry again. And Jesus says, no, this is not the way it was supposed to be. From the beginning, man and wife were supposed to be united as one. And so as long as it's not unlawful, that would be things like you're related or one of the spouses is already married, right? Those things that normally now we would say invalidate a marriage or prevent a marriage. Jesus said, other than those rare circumstances, you should not divorce. Not at all, not for any reason. Instead, you should strive to reconcile and stay together. And he goes even further, saying if someone divorces his wife and she gets remarried, he's causing her to commit adultery. Likewise, that person who divorces and remarries is committing adultery. I mean, these are Jesus' words. These are Jesus' words. And we know this is a very sensitive and difficult topic in our church, especially today with many Catholics who are experiencing this, divorce and remarriage. And so you might know someone in this boat, or maybe even you experience it yourself. And so here just want to speak very gently to you. These are the words of Jesus. We know what he says. And yet he does not abandon you. He does not leave you alone to figure it out for yourself. He's got your ministers, Father, the priests and the deacons. There are people who are experts, canon lawyers in this. In the church, there's a process for evaluating all circumstances and situations to help you to reconcile those so that you can come back and live in the right relationship, that right ordering that God is asking you in your marriages, in your relationship with him. And finally, the last one that Jesus touches on is don't make a false oath. Keep all your vows. That's a good law, right? I mean, don't swear false oaths. Don't lie. But Jesus says, don't even swear at all. Don't make promises at all. Don't say, I swear on heaven, I swear on earth. But instead, just let your yes mean yes. You shouldn't have to add on some other qualifier to say, no, I'm really telling the truth now because I'm swearing on the gold of the temple. No, just say just let your yes mean yes and your no mean no. No, keep your promises. Do what you say you're going to do, right? These different things help us to live the law, not just follow it, but to live it, Now, what if you've broken some of these commandments? Or what if there's times where you haven't really lived them out as fully as Jesus is asking us? Well, those are probably sins, brothers and sisters. But that's why in God's great mercy, he's given us the sacrament of confession. So that any time when you're sorry for those things, you look back and say, I could have done better. Lord, I didn't do what you were asking me to do. I did something you asked me not to. You can go to confession, go to God's mercy and be forgiven, be brought back to him. And those lesser sins, those venial sins, if you're sorry for them as you come to the altar today, that's why we say the penitential rite in Mass. And as you come to the altar, we believe that those minor sins, those venial sins, God can take those away even now as you receive Holy Communion. So he doesn't abandon us, but he wants to help us through this. And so now I want to leave you with just some words of encouragement. As the gospel ended, Jesus referenced again those false oaths, saying, let your yes mean yes and your no mean no. And anything else is from the evil one. Those sins, those temptations are from the devil, from the evil one. But the inverse is also true. When we live in the spirit of love, when we live God's laws, God is working in us. That's from God, of God. So when you are able to be patient with your children, with your siblings, you don't return evil for evil, instead turn the other cheek. God is there working in you. When you use your words to build someone up and encourage them rather than tear them down, when you protect someone's reputation, God is working in you. That is of God. He's working in you when you do those things. When a man protects his heart for his wife alone, when a woman protects her heart for her husband alone, there God is loving them in that relationship. When young people choose to wait until they're married, when single people, widows, widowers have decided to live chastity for the sake of the kingdom, there God is, living and working in you and through you. When those couples who are struggling in their marriage, are seeking forgiveness, even a very serious, difficult thing, seeking forgiveness and reconciliation, God is there working with you and in you and through you. Even in those difficult times, if you find yourself divorced and remarried, and the church is asking you to do these things, putting your trust in Him, in Jesus, trust in the church to work through that, God is there present, working and loving through you and with you. And finally, when you say yes and mean yes, when you're truthful, when you're honest, when you say only the good things that other people need to hear, there God is working through you. God is loving through you. And so when you do these things, when you follow the spirit of the law, not just the letter of it, but the spirit of it, the law of God's love that Jesus handed down, with His help, of course, always with His help, when you do this, your righteousness will surpass that of the scribes and Pharisees.